sometimes when we talk about this experimental mark making, you know, yeah, I'm removing this to make it lighter, but I'm doing it in a way, you know, what are the million different ways that I can lay this charcoal down and pick it up and kind of experiment with jabbing at the paper or, see now that space seems too great. The end of this bone, if I look straight up, it should be out from this eye like here, okay? I was making that way too short. So we're still working, we're still finding and tweaking proportion things as we work this. And now that makes a little more sense. It's overwhelming looking at all of it, so I just squint my eyes and I kind of see a simpler, big shape. There's direct lights in it, but it's like this bigger dark shape. And there's some little bones inside of it that are catching direct light. It may even be too early to even worry about those. Even down here on this bone, it's real small. And I don't know if you guys can all see this, feel free to move around. But see, there's direct light catching the end of this little tip of this bone, but there's this line where there's shadow, where it stops. That's a good cross contour line because there's actually just a really slight curvature to that bone and how that shadow comes out and then it goes back. I think it's always easy to draw it with a piece of fine charcoal than to sit here and battle an eraser and try to contour a line. So a lot of times I'll draw it first and then I'll come back up on it. You know the one thing I haven't been using, which a lot of my drawings, I just use a block eraser. It gets too rounded and black, cut it with an X-Acto knife. There's 8 new sharp corners. You can get in here and get some of this detail stuff. But I love these pen erasers. I just looked over one day and my students were using it. I'm like, what's that? And this is even a nicer one. It's really small. And definitely in the end, when I'm really, you know, resolved a lot of stuff with this and I'm kind of fine tuning little details. But some of these are just real small, just hard to get into. Some of these little pen erasers are nice. I think I got this one at Renaissance over in Hamilton art store. I'm sure Plaza has it too. In Kenwood.
Too, it's kind of like a hybrid.
It's called Tough Stuff. Most of them, Michael's, Hobby Lobby, if they have them. It's a little fatter. Actually, somebody gave me one earlier, that big blue one. It's real soft and fat and bendable. I tend not to like these too much because, you know, it's so rubbery and, you know. I mean, I guess it could be good, like that experimental mark making that we were talking about, you know. Well, yeah, I get you. Right. So, it's a little thicker. Yeah, they're all something. It's not that they're good and bad. It's just that they're different. Oh, is this an eraser, Paul?
So no, it's kind of like
a blending stub. It's cloth.
Blending stub, but it's kind of cloth still.
Right.
So it's actually like almost like a felt tip.
How do you clean it becomes the question. A lot of times with the paper blending stubs, and if you guys had this in your kit, you didn't know what it was. It's these little pieces of sandpaper. Okay. I don't have a lot left, so I need to get a new one. When I do a drawing, one of my portraits, I usually go through a whole pad of sandpaper. But if I wanted to get this back to white, since it was so dirty, it might take a couple pieces of sandpaper. A lot of times I'll use my jeans. And now, you know, if it wasn't picking up, and I spin it too sometimes if I really need it to pick up. But it's good to keep it dirty too, because eventually I can come back with a real dirty end of this and I can put down charcoal in a slightly different way than actually using a stick of charcoal within a direct light area. Okay, so your fingers, your hands. I love just fingers or these blending stubs for these reflective lights, because already, even without the white charcoal, you see how it's starting to operate like direct light, and down here these get lighter but not as light as the direct lights. There's two little holes down in here as well, in the skull, right within this reflective light. Again, it may be a little early for that kind of detail or whatever, but I can use it for proportions if I feel good about it, for other things. Sometimes, you know, we go to pick out reflective light, it's just not dark enough to begin with. So I was just kind of continuing that line where direct light ends and whatever, you know, shadow begins. Sometimes just coming in, and we can do it in a directional way of how we think those planes go, thinking about a planar analysis. But I just need to get some charcoal down here so I actually have something to pick out of. Even if I've worked a whole area and I don't believe it, it's just not really popping like, you know, I'm seeing out there. Sometimes the easiest thing to do is, and I know it seems intimidating, but that John Cassan, that David Cassan guy, you know, that's a little intimidating to do, but I'm just trying to get this whole area darker. We can still see where we were. We still have that, you know. And every time I revisit that edge, I'm going to do it in a way that I'm re-evaluating and maybe getting it a little bit more correct than the first time. There's this really hard edge down here at the bottom, right up against that reflective light. Where the bone ends, and it becomes a dark part of the shadow. So here again, attention to the edge, giving that super hard edge. Some of these little teeth are grabbing reflective lights. And right in between them, we can see some little darker areas, kind of like those two little holes in between the teeth, but not getting too caught up in drawing individual teeth right now. Just starting to get the indication of them. I start looking like Edward Scissorhands as I'm working because I forget to put stuff down. I just keep picking stuff up, so every once in a while I'll just set everything down and start fresh. I was just trying to put a little sample of it. It looks a little warmer too. Yeah. It actually says cool white, but not as cool as that one, right? So it's all just by comparison. Yeah, every once in a while, just sharpen this. I think the thing that happens a lot of times is that little sharp point wears off. It gets kind of rounded. It doesn't come off onto the paper as easy. So what people do,
the stuff that's already on there.
well, what people do, instead of stopping to sharpen it, they start pressing harder, and it starts to have kind of a glare to it. Or, you know, so we're kind of build this up slow. It's so weird because it almost seems so dark. I almost wish I had this on white paper, so I could know, like, you know, an exact white compared to these. I am looking up at that highlight on the cow.
Just cut a little white square and tape it on there.
Yeah. Yeah, or just having this maybe a little bit closer, you know. It's like photographers do, you know, in their samples. They'll have a little values thing card out to the side. So I know it seems like we're getting really light here, and eventually if I don't have a lot of black charcoal with this, and I think I went too light, I can start coming back into it.
The color that you're making it right now though is like similar to the color of the paper. Why not just try to get it back to the original paper color rather than adding white
No.
charcoal?
What I'm doing now is making it lighter than that paper. Right there's the paper.
Okay.
So what I'm doing is definitely lighter than what the paper
Okay.
is. Okay?
But you're close, you're in the, you're not.
This
that
is
far
just the
off.
first layer value though, you know? And like I said, this isn't a really dark object, or this isn't a really light object, so I don't know how aggressive I'm gonna get with this white charcoal. And even now, as I'm doing this work, and I see kind of this shape, and I see this plane, I can come in here, and I'm still always thinking about, you know, proportions. There's kind of this little crack, and I can see the shape of this plane, and when this crack comes down, it actually turns into a little shadow that kind of widens out and actually goes to that little black hole. And that's the core shadow right there. And then right below that core shadow is this reflective light. But as we move in space, you know, there's a lighter part of the reflective light, like right here on this one. There's something in this plane right here that just really faces the reflective light coming off of the ground. And it's really catching it right there. I still see it over here. It's still lighter, but it's not as light as it is there. So core shadow, same way. There'll be parts where it seems darker. It may seem darker or lighter. Right up here at the top of this, I just now saw it. And watch how this pops in just a second. There's actually a little teeny, it's just catching a little direct light. It's actually the ridge of a bone. It's just catching a little direct light right on the top of it. So it's just finding little things like that that are going to start to model like this three-dimensional object. And again, every time I'm working on this outside edge, whether I'm drawing black off of this side, or I'm using a blending stub or what have you on the other side, I'm trying to get that outside edge as hard as possible. You see how just that little bit of work, all of a sudden it just popped a little more, like you can almost reach under there and grab it. Still pretty simple, I think, at this stage compared to when it's finished, of what it's going to be, but little details that I think people would leave out because they're like, oh, nobody's going to know what that is or whatever. There's this little direct light, and then there's this little dip where it catches shadow, and then there's just a little sliver of direct light before it disappears again into that like cavern of that crack. A lot of people would just omit that. And if charcoal is, you know, too dark, sometimes just a touch of a finger or a blending stub. And it's also kind of hard edged up against it. So not to cross mix a bunch of white with black, but as I come up along the edge of that. It's just one of those little points of incidence, like an illustration that makes it look like a real thing, because real things have cracks and weather and rust and Yeah, so this is just the first couple layers I'm starting to build up. And like I keep saying, I don't think this thing actually gets that light. But once I get something, it's kind of like here where I just went in and made that all darker. Well, now, it's not that that's it. You know, I think there's still a lot of work to do. But now I actually have, I think it was just so light, I couldn't really dig out of it. But it's like now I have something to dig out of when I'm seeing these reflective lights. So weird, there's this thin edge of the bone. And this may be a little finishing detail for later, but it's actually just catching a little bit of direct light. But I think the thing not to do is like go all the way down that and have no value variation, you know? So I might not even come back with the white charcoal in every little spot, just grabbing it on a little bit. But it really starts to define that that's a whole plane of bone lifting up there, and it's actually catching and some of these direct lights, you know, may be similar. You know, there's the darkest direct lights. They get real similar to the lightest reflective lights. But that's the challenge. I think people make the reflective lights way too light. They make them just as light as the direct lights, and then it gets confusing as to where the light source is coming from. Okay. So I think there's still a lot, obviously there's still a lot of work here, but the cool thing about this process, and I think if I was just working and not talking, I probably could have gotten to this point a lot quicker. But like, I love it because look, in the first hour of a drawing, it starts looking very three-dimensional. By digging out the direct lights, eventually start laying in some of the white charcoal in those areas. With the finger, kind of pulling out some of those reflective lights, starting to draw in some of the darker darks. You can really start to see it. It really starts to pop and become three-dimensional. And remember the conversation we had about we're battling that white paper? It's like we're trying to remake this highlight on this hammer, these tools, you know? And it's like, well, how do I make this a highlight unless I get everything else dark, you know? So we can sit here with our white paper and eventually hatch and build up, and that's a lot of work, and we'll eventually get to that point. But the cool thing about this is we started with a dark sheet of paper, and we're pulling out lights and drawing in white lights, but we're also drawing in darker darks. But at a real early stage, it starts to render. I want you guys, before you leave today, go take a close look at that skull drawing and see how simple it is. From a distance, it really looks hyper believable, and as you get close, you realize it's just some big, simple shapes of value, some nice observations, and really attaining I think everything we're talking about today is a hierarchy of your values. My lightest light to my darkest dark, and in-betweens. But what a lot of people do in a drawing, it's like, okay, there's the darkest dark, and we also see it there, and there, in the lightest light, and we also see it in 20 other places. They kind of rip their whole drawing down to like 3 or 4 values, and they distribute those everywhere, you know? So a good example is this cow we keep talking about. What if I made the whitest white, what I consider the lightest light in this skull, I made it that light, and then also the lightest lights on the cow, I made it that light. And that's what they would do. All these different lights that they see in these 4 different objects, they all get that. And wherever I see a dark, and can you guys see that as dark as this shadow is, see how this shadow is a little lighter? They wouldn't get that distinction. Whatever they made this, they would make that the same exact. They would make all their shadows the exact same value. And even if it wasn't terrible, it wouldn't quite have the believability of somebody that was a little more sensitive to that established a little bit more of a hierarchy with their values.
Do you have any idea what name was this one?
You know what, I don't. I have to look into it.
It's probably some kind of ungulate.
Some kind of what?
Ungulate, like a hoofed,
Mm-hmm.
like a deer or something.
There's a couple we have in the back that are definitely cow skulls. But yeah, I'm not sure about these ones. Okay, guys. I think that's enough for it, well, and it's time, you know, but, I think that's enough for today. But I think, I'm gonna spend some time before I leave here, very quickly, so that I can get up to my other class, taping this off and marking off these shadows, so I can work this up right along with you guys next class. But you're gonna do what I did, you're gonna start, you know, maybe leaving room, like eventually I might get that cow too, you might get like a couple of these objects, and maybe to start, just focusing on one. And really just bind charcoal on a tone piece of that Camford cardstock. And if we don't get the white charcoal at all next class, that's fine, you know. I think it's a little premature for me to start laying in white charcoal. I would probably wanna work it a little bit more.
So do you have any,
And we'll spend the next 2 weeks taking this all the way up.
do you have any
Okay.
tips on how for us to transport a tone piece of paper back and forth without it getting all over everything?
I mean, are you gonna
Like if we
feel
tone
Yeah,
up a piece
yes.
of paper, like how do we do,
Well,
what do we do so that we don't get a bunch of charcoal over everything, or we just, is that just part of dealing with it?
do you guys have drawing boards?
Yes.
Not that big, maybe it's gonna be like 15
Is it big enough for this paper?
Take like half an hour.
is it okay if we still look at it down?
15.
Yeah, you could cut it down if you guys want. If you just want to do a nice drawing of one of these skulls,
I only saw
14 by 17. I hate the idea of putting this in that portfolio with the plastic sleeves. I would never put my drawings in something like that, you know. But what you could do is maybe get a good digital photograph of it, make a print of it, and that print goes into that portfolio. You know, this is one of your first portfolios. It's not going to be the portfolio you go on a job interview 4 years from now. You know, that portfolio is going to change. It's going to become an electronic disc with all your other work,
It's gonna
right?
be on a website.
Right, on a website. So when you guys get a really nice charcoal drawing like this, and then when I'm completely done, I spray it with spray fix, and I never touch it until it's framed and behind glass. But at this stage, it's not the worst thing in the world. I keep it taped down to the board. I take a couple sheets of that newsprint, and I tape that over it, okay? I always walk with it out, so you don't brush your leg up. I've done that a couple times, okay? Never walk out in the rain with it. If you have a plastic portfolio, you could put this paper in, but again, I would put newsprint in between it. And when you get that drawing out to work on it, you'll take that newsprint up and you'll see charcoal on it. Don't put that same newsprint back on that drawing. Every time you put it away, you put clean newsprint in between it, all right?